Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our secret underground lair, or as we like to call it, the Googleplex. Today, we're pleased to have two speakers today, Drs. Daniel Wilson and Anna Long, who are on their most recent book tour. Daniel earned his degree in robotics from Carnegie Mellon, and Anna is a clinical psychologist currently practicing in the Oregon area. We also have in our midst, in relation to the book, we also have Daniel Hurd, who is the illustrator. So if there's any art-related questions, we do have a pinch hitter that we can bring in to answer them. Now, some of you who are some of our more seasoned Googlers may remember Daniel speaking here a little while back. He talked about his book at that time, How to Survive a Robot Uprising, which was basically awesome. I watched it the weekend before in advance of this talk. This seminal work has prevented, to this very day, the looming threat of robot attack. So the fact that we're safe is a testament to Daniel and his work. Unfortunately, the talk was premiered before I started at Google, so I unfortunately am not the best resource should the robot uprising ever come, but at least now we know. Our subject today is genius. And I don't just mean the book. Evil genius is what we're speaking about today. From the words of Oscar Levant to Dr. Evil, popular culture has always walked the line between genius and insanity. Today, Daniel and Anna show us some of their superstars in their latest book, which is the Mad Scientist Hall of Fame. Muwahahahaha. It's actually there at the end. I practiced that in advance of the talk, I won't lie. From evil overlords to crazy psychologists, we have a lot to learn. After the talk, for the benefit of our virtual and YouTube audiences, we'll have the time for questions and answers. So please don't be evil. Use the Q&A mic, and it'll be all set. And then we'll also have time for some signings afterwards. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Daniel Wilson and Anna Long.
Okay, hey everybody, thanks for coming to our talk. That's right, I was here a few years ago talking about killer robots. But guess what? Killer robots don't build themselves, okay? It takes a special type of person to do that, and that's a mad scientist. And that's what this book is about. Basically, this book is a result of a collaboration between a psychologist and a nerd. So when you put those two things together, mad scientists are what falls out. So, you're hiding my card.
Sorry.
Man, this is rough. So, we are obviously a crack squad. We're a good team over here. Basically, what this book does is we go through a lot of different mad scientists and we diagnose them, okay? Specifically, we chose only mad scientists who are either fictional or dead. And that's basically because we want to be outside the reach of their machinations. Little clarification, though, they're not all evil. So as you look through those mad scientists and you think, why did they think Marie Curie was evil? She was a saint. Well, she was a saint, and we're not saying she's evil. So we'll explain more.
She did have some psychological issues.
Yeah, she had some issues. But we'll get into exactly why we chose those mad scientists. We're going to talk about how we diagnose them, and just basically explain what's in the book. So first of all, we had a big problem, which is how do you diagnose a mad scientist whenever they're fictional and or dead? You can't actually just sit them down on the couch and do it. So I'm going to let Anna talk about that since she's the psychologist.
Okay, so first of all, as a psychologist, I do not use a couch in the Freudian sense of things.
No couch?
No couch, sorry.
Okay, noted.
I occasionally use a couch, but no laying down couches. Obviously, in my professional life, I actually like to see people before I diagnose them with some sort of mental disorder. Was more echoey before, now it's less. But part of my training in graduate school was actually in forensic psychology, and in forensic psychology, you don't always see the person that you're diagnosing or trying to sort of get some handle on their different issues. So, and also as a child psychologist, I often depend on what parents tell me about their children's behavior in order to make a diagnosis. So part of what we ended up doing for this mad scientist book is really collecting a lot of evidence from other sources besides the mouths of the mad scientists themselves, although many of them have been captured on film saying crazy things. So
So we got some direct observations.
we got direct behavioral
Watching lots of
observations
movies.
from watching movies about mad scientists, and we also read biographies and sort of life stories for the real life mad scientists who, yes, are all dead, so that we don't either slander live people or have them come after us.
Yeah, it was actually perfect because Anna was working for a forensic psychologist, which I kind of see this as like the psychologist's superpower is you can look at somebody and then say, "You're crazy," and then it's real. They really are crazy. It's amazing to be able to do that. And of course, crazy isn't the only diagnosis. So that's kind of what she was doing for a living. It's a little more prosaic in real life because
In real
it's
life,
sort
it's
of
actually
like,
not as interesting.
I should get the kid because she's crazy. And then, she has to read
So-
about someone's ex-wife. And
Yeah,
That's a bummer.
In
Sorry.
forensic psychology, it's a lot of going through records, health records, police records, people's videotaped interviews with them. You have them do different psychological tests, and that's something where you collect a lot of information about people's behaviors and then use that to sort of make a recommendation about who should have the kid or whether someone was actually psychologically injured because of an event that they're suing for money for. So mad scientists, especially the fictional ones, were a lot more fun to read about and observe their behaviors. And part of what we did is sort of collect behavioral specifics and see whether they fit with our diagnostic hypotheses. So we're
Yeah.
looking for very specific things. So psychologists don't actually just magically say, "You're crazy."
I would if I was a mad if I was a mad psychologist.
Right.
So yeah, actually that does flow into how we picked all the mad scientists in the first place, right? So you guys are thumbing through and you're going, "Oh my God, my favorite mad scientist isn't in here." And I'm
Might
really
not be.
sorry, but write your own book first of all. But is it too harsh? Okay, but second of all, the whole of the mad scientists that we chose is greater than the sum of its parts. We picked them all so that they would hang together, right? Because if you start looking at all the mad scientists, you got a lot of narcissism, and you got a lot of, throw out some more diagnoses.
Antisocial personality disorder.
Antisocial personality disorder, for instance. And you don't just want to read about 15 of those, right? So you also get some mad scientists who were just maybe, Auguste Piccard was a sensation seeker. He was the sort of guy who could go into a balloon and go up into the, breaking records in terms of going up into the atmosphere, nearly die, and then land and just, go
Do
have
it again.
breakfast and do it again the next day.
Yeah.
Or go ahead and design a bathysphere.
Yeah, because his wife forbade him to go up into the stratosphere any longer.
Right.
So he went undersea instead.
He's a man of his word.
Yeah.
And not evil. So,
So yes, some of what we basically used from my perspective as a psychologist too, it was a fun opportunity to sort of share a lot of the basics of how clinical psychologists diagnose, what the process is of sort of collecting observations and seeing how they map onto different symptom clusters. So for me, it was also an opportunity to share some of my most favorite concepts in clinical and social psychology. So we got to talk about sensation seeking, we got to talk about psychological resilience and development. So not every single mad scientist is totally, completely off their rocker.
well, and that's part of the reason. One of the reasons why the book is awesome is because you get to actually learn about psychology, right? So every mad scientist is basically bringing a different, horrible mental affliction to the table. But the other reason is that you actually get to learn about these mad scientists and you get to figure out stuff that maybe you didn't know. So for instance, one of my favorites is Nemo, Captain Nemo, right? He's just this crazy guy with the Nautilus, with this ship. Well, when you really get down into it and you read about his background and you start actually diagnosing it, you realize that Nemo was totally depressed. He was trying to escape from the world. He was having all these troubles. He had lost his family. And you actually can see why he behaves the way he does and why he doesn't just, for instance, kill the people that he picks up in the sea, why he's kind of good and kind of bad. And those are the most interesting mad scientists, I think. Although, we also, on another sort of axis, we look at prototypical mad scientists. We go onward to check out some of the more derivative mad scientists, and then finally you come all the way around until you get mad scientists that are just completely sarcastic. So for instance, you start with Frankenstein and Dr. Jekyll. Okay, so these guys are prototypical mad scientists who transgressed against nature and were punished, right? They went too far, they competed with God, that's it. And so then you wait a little longer and you get somebody like, who's one of my favorites actually, Seth Brundle from The Fly. And I'm talking Jeff Goldblum too. I'm not talking old Fly, I'm talking new Fly. So this is Jeff Goldblum at his like sort of mad science best. You know, he's running around, he's manic, and he's got all these really stereotypical traits of mad scientists, but they're trying to pull it off and be serious. So he doesn't just choose clothes in the morning, he's got a rows of identical suits. Einstein did it. You know, it's like, yeah, that's pretty much just derivative, but I love it. And then you keep going further and you end up with Dr. Evil, of course, who has every trait of a mad scientist and then some, and it's just heaped on. And it's pretty hilarious. And actually, I should mention, we didn't interact with any of the mad scientists because they were all dead or fictional for the book, except for one. We did get a quote from Dr. Evil, which was nice. He read the book and responded and gave us,
He threatened to liquidate us.
Yeah.
Because we had uncovered too much about his evil plans.
He did threaten to liquidate, but as it turns out, Dr. Evil is played by an actor named Mike Myers, so we're in no real danger. He's fictional.
Thank you for that insight.
I like to share.
As a psychologist, one of the things that actually really bugs me about the term mad scientist is that it means nothing. It's not specific. Mad scientist does not map onto a really tight cluster of symptoms, which is what you would like to see a psychological diagnosis do. So within mad scientists, there's this diversity of types of psychopathology. And I think you could argue that there are, especially in literature and film, sort of subgenres of types of mad scientists that have evolved over time. But we thought that the best way to really understand the development and psychopathology of the mad scientist was to do it on a case-by-case basis and really sort of give each mad scientist that we reviewed their due and what they deserve, which is a complete evaluation on their own. So that was, I think, what sort of drove us to try to be more accurate. And it's a little tongue-in-cheek how accurate we are, obviously, but...
Well, yeah, I mean, what's also really fun is the interplay between real scientists and fictional ones. So in the same chapter, you might have... So we've got a chapter, for instance, on mad scientists who communicated with space aliens. It's no big deal. You can get a lot of good information from space aliens. Tesla thought you could. You know, so it's sort of like... He was
real.
And Tesla was a real guy. Lex Luthor also cooperated often with space aliens.
But there were aliens in his world, actually.
That's right. So it was really interesting to see how, as you pull out all these diagnoses, you see certain repetitions that occur in real mad scientists and fictional ones. Another one of my favorites is, well, it also goes fictional to fictional. So for instance, you've got Dr. Moreau, who is living alone on this island and building genetic mutants, basically. And he's got a little mini version of himself who's hideously deformed and just kind of walks around and mimics everything he does. And they actually play piano together. The little guy's got a mini piano on top of a grand piano. And it's like, does that remind you of anything? You know, if you've seen Dr. Evil, you see that he's got this exact same situation going on.
I'm pretty sure he just ripped them off.
Yeah, that was probably just him ripping
way.
them off in a great way. And the other thing is that as we write this, we are sort of honoring the mad scientists. This is to give them their due. So we talk about what they had going wrong with them, but it's almost a celebration of that, because in a lot of cases I think that it takes a little bit of madness in order to reach your full potential as a genius. And that's the reason, actually, that we don't have any really nasty mad scientists from real life. We don't cover any people, any like Nazis, for instance, that would just be kind of a downer. It's
they're
the same
not
reason.
funny.
Yeah,
Or nice.
They are so not funny, as it turns out. That is sort of the same reason that in Robot Uprising, I never actually talk about any real robotics like military weapons platforms. You can learn just as much about the topic without actually going there. So, do you want to read some?
You want to read it? You're going to do the intro?
Sure. Okay. For millennia, legions of mad scientists have toiled in underground laboratories, trespassed into the territory of gods, and cackled madly about it into the night. Although the origin of the modern mad scientist is buried in classic literature, think Dr. Frankenstein, it pervades pop culture all the way up to the blockbuster movies of today, think Dr. Evil. And thanks to the machinations of real-life mad scientists, we currently enjoy such inventions as electricity, television, and non-kinetic directed energy weapons. Gotta love those. We have a lot to be thankful for, clearly. Who else has kept our comic book superheroes on the run, our cities of the future afloat, and our robot hordes well-serviced? Yet despite all the happiness and terror that mad scientists have given to us, what have we ever given back to them? It's this book.
So before I was willing to diagnose any mad scientists, I had to write a disclaimer, just, for my professional integrity. So there's a disclaimer at the beginning of the book.
She's actually a practicing psychologist, unlike me, so she actually has a career to worry about. Lay it on us.
Yes, okay. So the psychological interpretations presented in this book are to be considered only hypotheses. No psychological assessment measures were administered to any of the mad scientists, real or fictional, included in this book. No direct behavioral observations of psychological symptoms or functioning were made of the mad scientists, although many of them have been caught in action on film. No interviews were conducted with any of the mad scientists including in this book, nor have any interviews been conducted with their creators, relatives, or victims. The diagnoses provided follow criteria outlined in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorder, 4th edition, text revision, DSM-4-TR, published by the American Psychiatric Association. This manual employs a multi-axial approach to diagnosis. The majority of psychological diagnoses are coded on axis 1 and include mood disorders, psychotic disorders, and anxiety disorders. Personality disorders, which are thought to be more permanent aspects of functioning, are coded on axis 2. Axis 3 includes physical disorders and medical conditions. Axis 4 describes psychosocial and environmental conditions such as economic hardship or family strife. And finally, Axis 5 is coded as the Global Assessment of Functioning, or GAF, a number ranging from 0 to 100 that indicates overall level of functioning. Please note that despite generally adhering to DSM-4 diagnostic criteria, none of the diagnoses included in this text should be considered to be actual medical or clinical diagnoses. No mad scientists were harmed during the making of this book.
Not at all. You know what? It might be fun, actually, to go through and pick from each axis one paragraph to read, just to give people a feel. Do you think you can do that? Right.
No, I don't think I can do that. No.
Not on the fly. We're not going to do that.
No, but what, a paragraph or just a set of diagnoses?
Just a paragraph. Like, for instance, well, here, let's just do it. So, like, you got these 5 axes, right?
Yes,
let's name them again. Start with the first one.
1.
Yeah. She's the creativity in the group. She's the one. Sorry.
Okay.
Teamwork.
Axis 1 is diagnoses like mood disorders, anxiety disorders, psychotic disorders, sort of mental problems that can be temporary.
Okay, so give us an example.
So Marie Curie, she has major depressive disorder.
Yeah, her husband gets hit by a...
Many major depressive episodes are preceded by some major loss in life. So there is actually sort of a bereavement period that's considered to be normal, but then after that persists for a long time, then you can have a diagnosis of depression.
Right.
So she's a good example of an Axis 1 disorder.
Okay. Axis 2.
Serious personality problems that are not going to change without major intervention. And
those are my favorite.
I think that really is the axis where most of the sort of prototypical fictional mad scientists get a lot of diagnoses. So either antisocial personality disorder, they don't care for the rights of others, or narcissistic personality disorder, they're very sort of wrapped up in their own perspective on the world. And
So that's like when Lex Luthor names every invention that he comes up with after himself.
Lutherite.
The Lexoskeleton, Lexthor, LexCorp, Lexor, Lexorians. Yeah, it'll be that. What's
Yeah.
axis 3?
General medical disorders and problems.
So that's like Hubert Farnsworth getting,
Yeah,
Professor Calculus getting extremely elderly
and deaf.
and suffering from problems like that where a bomb explodes and he thinks that someone's knocking on the door. That kind of thing can be dangerous.
Right. So the third axis is included because your general medical condition obviously affects your psychological functioning and your behavior a lot. So, like Julius No had both of his hands chopped off. What do we call that? Bilateral hand amputation.
Yeah, it was.
So, and that definitely can affect your functioning. So.
And the fourth axis?
Axis 4 is more conditions that are unusual, or notable about your environment and your living conditions. So living on a submarine.
Yeah, Captain Nemo living in a
Captain
submarine. That definitely goes down under axis 4.
Yeah.
Or like Dr. Moreau, living on an abandoned island in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by grotesquely deformed creatures.
Yeah. And one
Yeah,
step
that
back
goes
to
down.
axis 1. You can also have relationship problems are coded on axis 1. So, like, Dr. Evil has a parent-child relational problem with his son.
Seth Brundle tries to drag his girlfriend into the
Right.
teleporter so that she can be genetically recombined with him.
Right.
That's
That's
not
not nice.
good relationship stuff there. Take note.
So, actually, do you
I'm
want to
gonna-
read a little bit about Tesla, or would you like
Yeah.
me to? Okay.
I'm gonna cruise through a little section on some of the scientific achievements of Tesla, just a paragraph. One of my favorite paragraphs. Tesla proposed many ideas about power that were fairly accurate and some others that were a bit outlandish. For example, he understood that wireless transmission of energy was possible, but did not recognize that there would be limits on how much energy could be transmitted through the air. Tesla envisioned a huge tower that would distribute free energy to everyone on Earth by bouncing current off the ionosphere. But he did not realize that this technology wouldn't generate sufficiently high currents for running things like lights and appliances, although it does work for AM radio. Tesla also envisioned this device as a giant weapon, which he attempted to sell for defense purposes. Little footnote here. Like Dr. Evil, Tesla requested exorbitant sums of money from government officials, negotiating with the Prime Minister of Great Britain for $30 million US, about $500 million in today's market, in exchange for a defense ray machine. The negotiations failed, and there's no known prototype of Tesla's death ray. Awesome. Tesla also believed that one could use this energy to change Earth's weather patterns, which scientists today believe is impossible. Tesla's understanding of the ionosphere and wireless energy transmission was certainly far ahead of his time, but his vision sometimes exceeded the constraining realities of the physical world. So there's an example of some crossover between real and fictional. You want me to read a little Luther?
Okay. You want to read a little Luther?
Yeah, I do. Here's some scientific accomplishments for Lex Luthor. Lex Luthor is arguably the greatest renegade mad scientist of all time. In addition to creating flying cars, jetpacks, spacecraft, Luthor has invented dozens of ridiculously destructive weapons for the military. One such weapon, the Lexoskel Suit 5000, is a protective robotic exoskeleton for soldiers. An attempt by Luthor to sell these suits to Kasnian terrorists was foiled by Superman. Luthor's general science degree from MIT seems to have served him well. His strong grasp of chemistry allowed him to manufacture lutherite, a synthetic version of the naturally occurring element kryptonite. He also succeeded in designing a device to summon beings from the fourth dimension. Little footnote. Similar experiments were met with failure by Jack Parsons, a famed rocket scientist and occultist, who shows up later. Not a Satanist, just an occultist. There's some argument about that online. Given that Superman's X-ray vision poses a huge obstacle to the successful completion of Luthor's diabolical inventions, Luthor has been forced to create clever secret bases, many of which are lined with lead to debilitate Superman's X-ray vision. These secretive retreats have included a farmhouse near Metropolis, abandoned factories, an electronics firm in Metropolis, a secret mountaintop laboratory and fortress, a lead-lined subterranean hideout under a grassy hill, an ancient glass-enclosed city, a giant spaceship laboratory, a complex of buildings held in the air by a huge dirigible, and a lair on a man-made meteor floating in outer space. He's prolific, you know, that guy. Luther has also given birth to genius inventions when he's applied his scientific acumen to his criminal endeavors. These creations have included a vault blaster, a money magnet, an earthquake maker, and an atomic death ray. So, you know, getting down into the nitty-gritty of that science for you.
So I thought I would read a little bit about Dr. Evil's psychopathology, because I think it's a good example of sort of the prototypical kill all humans mad scientist.
I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. So Dr. Evil exhibits traits of antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder, both diagnoses that are typically unlikely to change without intense intervention. His name is apt, as these characteristics are pervasive and observed in long-standing patterns of behavior that have a severe negative influence on his relationship with others, and he has homicidal tendencies as well. He exhibits the following troubling symptoms: antisocial irritability and aggressiveness, as indicated by physical fights or assaults. Dr. Evil repeatedly becomes irritable and subsequently assaults his employees. While sitting at his conference table, he enjoys pressing small red buttons that mechanically launch struggling employees from their high-backed conference chairs and into roaring pits of fire. Usually, such employees are killed outright, but other times they are only very seriously injured.
So if you know somebody who does that, antisocial irritability and aggressiveness, you can diagnose them just like that, pow, through this power of reading.
That's just a symptom, not a full diagnosis. Antisocial, lack of remorse and empathy. Dr. Evil's maniacal laughter indicates that he enjoys thinking about the suffering of others. He demonstrates no signs of remorse when he sets his employees on fire, and shows positive affect or expressed emotion when he commits assaults on others. In fact, Dr. Evil seems incapable and uninterested in understanding anything from someone else's point of view. He frequently ignores his own son's pleas for attention and understanding. I'm not going to say zip it like Mike Myers can do it, but he repeatedly tells his son to zip it.
And to shh.
And shh, like that. So Dr. Evil also has is sort of the core feature of narcissistic personality disorder, which is a grandiose sense of self-importance. Dr. Evil's inflated sense of self-importance is most apparent in his creation of custom-made personal spacecraft designed to cryogenically freeze and preserve him for future evil exploits. It's notable that Dr. Evil feels that he's the only person deserving of being frozen and preserved. His sense of self-importance is also belied by the shape of his spacecraft. One is shaped like a giant big boy, and the other bears a curious resemblance to enormous male genitalia. He also has preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success, money, and power. So Dr. Evil frequently demands exorbitant sums of money. While a guest on the Jerry Springer show, he succinctly expressed his desire for power by clutching a globe and declaring, "The world is mine," to the camera. So, some of his symptoms.
Okay, did you want to read one more?
Okay, I think we will read one more before questions. This section is one of my favorite. This is about a real-life mad scientist, the only psychologist who made it into the book, Stanley Milgram. And he conducted a number of experiments in the 1950s and 60s, and this section is called Uncovering Shocking Evil. So Milgram's most famous research question was simple: how much pain will a person inflict on another human being if someone in authority tells them to? A number of previous experiments had demonstrated that people are likely to conform to group beliefs, including changing their answer about the length of a line to agree with everyone else, even if the group is blatantly wrong. But Milgram was not satisfied with these results. He wanted to investigate people's responses to authority when something much more important than the length of a line was in question. Drawing on deep creativity and a strong understanding of experimental design, Milgram concocted an experiment that elegantly answered this question, although it required deception and may have inflicted mental trauma. He invited a range of subjects into the laboratory, from Yale college students to middle-aged welders and prim elderly ladies. Subjects were told that they were participating in a study about the effects of punishment on learning. Each subject began the experiment with another subject who was actually a confederate, a member of the research team. The subject and the confederate drew pieces of paper to determine who would be the teacher and learner in the experiment. Both pieces of paper said teacher, so that the subject would always be assigned to the role of teacher. An official experimenter in a laboratory coat explained that the learner would be learning a list of words and would be given a mild shock each time he got a word incorrect. The subject watched as the learner was taken into an adjacent room, strapped into a chair, and had electrodes placed on his arms. Milgram's attention to detail was hilariously frightening, as at this point in the experiment, the strapped-in confederate casually mentions that he has a heart condition.
That's totally written into the experiment, right? Every time he does this in order to maintain the control.
Yeah, it needs to be exactly the same the whole time. The subject is then taken into a room and shown an elaborate machine with wires coming out of the back. And this is one of my favorite machines in psychology literature. So it's a big, long metal box, and it reads shock generator, type ZLB, Dyson Instrument Company, Waltham, Massachusetts, output 15 volts to 450 volts. And then it has little metal toggle switches that go across the whole length. And the switches are each labeled. They range from slight shock on the left all the way up to severe shock. And then further to the right, there's a switch that just says XXX. So obviously it's not a real machine, but the fact that Milgram had the creativity to come up with this, it's kind of
You got to
awesome.
wonder if grad students were involved, actually, now
I
that I'm
think he
thinking about
started doing
this.
it when he was a grad student.
Okay.
So he was the
Makes
grad
sense.
student. So built on a solid foundation of deception, the mental torture portion of the experiment was set to begin. The subject was instructed to begin with switch 1 and to give an increasing shock level each time the learner made a mistake. And the poor Confederate learner made a lot of mistakes. In fact, the learner's mistakes were also recorded, as were their screams, so that each person had the same experience of harming someone else. They're hearing the same scream. If the subject hesitated to deliver the next shock level, the lab coat-wearing experimenter followed a scripted set of authoritative and calm prompts, such as, please continue. And if the learner doesn't answer in a reasonable time, consider it wrong and follow the same procedure you've been doing for a wrong answer. Ultimately, variations on these experimental procedures were conducted with hundreds of subjects. The results showed that humans demonstrate a striking obedience to authority in inflicting pain on others. In the first set of experiments, 65% of subjects went all the way up to 450 volts or XXX shock level, despite hearing hysterical screams followed by dead silence from the learner, who had failed to learn the words and apparently paid dearly for it. Some subjects were more nervous or upset about the process than others, but the majority obeyed. After reaching the highest level of shock they could inflict, subjects were let in on the ruse and were told that the learner was not actually shocked. Sort of like an ultra-sadistic candid camera or punked, but with less laughing.
And more mental torture.
After years of conducting these experiments, the thorough-minded Milgram concluded that the majority of people, regardless of their demographic characteristics, so stable features such as gender, age, or socioeconomic status, the majority of people will comply with commands as long as they believe that they come from a legitimate authority with an official lab coat. Milgram did not predict the backlash of publicity. All it takes is a lab coat.
God.
Yeah. People were both outraged at Milgram's methods and horrified by the dark features of human nature he had uncovered. But there's a good side to Milgram's work also. So his work prompted a debate in the field of psychology about the ethics of using deception in experimental settings. Researchers who wish to use deception now must provide a convincing argument that the ends justify the means. So the benefit of the knowledge that will be gained by tricking people must outweigh the personal, physical, or psychological risks to the people in the experiment. And additionally, Milgram's use of debriefing served as a prototype for all psychologists, and subsequently, ethics boards began requiring debriefing in studies where subjects were deceived. And all proposed experiments that study humans now have a section titled Protection of Human Subjects, thanks to Milgram. So in a roundabout way, his experiments ultimately made us all a little safer from the probing experimentations of a new generation of mad scientists.
Thank you, Milgram.
Thanks, Milgram.
And the very last thing we're going to read, I'm just going to read at the end. There's a little bit of a section on how to determine whether or not you are a mad scientist. And also,
we call those assessment tools.
yes,
There's
some
an assessment tool at the end of the book.
And there's also some advice if you're not scoring as high as you'd like on becoming a mad scientist. So here's a couple tips on improving your science quotient. It's broken down into science and madness. Keep a field notebook on hand and constantly scribble zoological observations about your pets, friends, and coworkers. Do not hesitate to test pilot your own inventions, but remember to tether flying machines to the ground for the first flight. I learned that actually writing the jetpack book when talking about those scientists. When the victims of your experiments are screaming for mercy, don't just listen impassively. Use a decibel meter to determine the loudness and pitch of the shrieks and write down your data. Don't waste time on pointless details. Either throw on a motley collection of clothes chosen randomly off the floor or wear multiple pairs of identical suits like Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. Tips on improving your madness quotient. Spend more time alone. Underground or on an island if possible. If being alone hinders your scientific research, be sure to hire helpers who don't speak the same language as each other, have been lobotomized, and or have grotesque physical deformities. It's just something to do. And if you spent your life seeking to exact revenge upon parties that have wronged you, talk about it. I bet people really want to know about it. And whatever it is, don't be afraid to mutter it out loud. So those are my tips for you. And now we will take questions.
Yes. Oh, you have to use a microphone, or you're going to get in trouble.
This doesn't quite get mentioned in your book, but I was just wondering, do you think genius or mad genius is an inherent trait that comes, when an individual is born, or is it acquired, or is it a controllable trait? You give some suggestions at the end that guide people how to become mad scientists. I assume so. At least you believe, somewhat you can acquire it, but
Yes.
I would be more happy if you could explicitly address this aspect.
Okay, so I would say that madness, and I would think that madness, which is a horrible term, but we'll use it anyways. I think madness and genius are independent dimensions, and it's a rare individual where you get high levels of both of those things and the person remains functional. And in fact, in some of the cases of the mad scientists, they kind of decompensate over time because they just can't quite keep it all together. So I would say that, well, definitely your intelligence level is largely heritable. There are a few things that you can do to make it higher, but
and mental illness is also heritable.
A lot of mental illnesses are heritable, but not all. So I think it's just a rare individual that comes out high on both of those traits. But I would really say it's genetic. I don't actually think that you can become a mad scientist by doing the things in the back of the book.
You can laugh and madly cackle, perhaps. No, if it's a question of nature versus nurture and becoming a mad scientist, actually, if you read through, you find examples of both. Mm-hmm. So you have somebody like Tesla, who's just so smart that it's very difficult for him to interact with human beings at all, and he does things that are really, really strange. And so in that case, I think that he was just born that way. I think he was like that his whole life. And then if you look at somebody like Brundle, he's just a smart guy, but then he goes through that teleporter and starts becoming a fly. And so that starts to drive him insane. Or Dr. Jekyll, who just drinks something and suddenly becomes nuts.
So, but another sort of interesting point about that, I think that when you look at the real life mad scientists, a lot of them in their childhoods did have either a high emphasis on science education in their families, or if you look at like Philo Farnsworth, who invented the television, he was just a smart kid who had engines on a farm to fool around with, and he was able to, in that environment, sort of develop some of those skills. But in his case, the genius or the madness part of his personality that kind of pushed him forward was a little bit of mania. And I think if you're gonna pick a psychological disorder to have in order to up your science amplitude, it would be mania. I mean, you can stay up all night, you can get a lot of stuff done. I mean...
Yeah, you can ignore morality It's
No,
awesome.
you don't ignore morality in mania. You just forget about it.
You get so caught up.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
did that answer your question? Enough?
So some of the scientists, well, at least one of the scientists you mentioned, and another one that I would love to see treated, Tesla and Newton, seem to have features that I associate with autism. They don't like touching people. They don't like interacting with people. They have a lot of trouble with empathy. How likely is an explanation like that, or what would tend to make you think that's not true?
I think that in some cases that is a very likely explanation.
Well, autism is a really broad.
Autism is a very broad category, but I think we do know now from research that there is what we would call sort of the autism spectrum. And in some cases of very intelligent scientists, I think there a smidge of some of those symptoms of autism does occur and is observable.
Yeah, and it's like really clear in their personal interactions that this falls out. So did we actually diagnose anybody with any
We didn't.
autism?
Partly because it's a developmental disorder and you need to know a lot more about their childhood than we knew.
Yeah. Well, it does bring up one interesting point, which is that if you look at every one of these scientists is rated on the axes of the DSM, right? So if you look at the last page of each one of these, they've all got this number, which is the GAF, right? And that number is basically from 0 to 100. If it's 100, they're just functioning perfectly. If it's lower, it's because they're suffering some kind of setback. But you never see anybody in here with a GAF that's just totally low, because it's really tough to be a mad scientist if you're suffering from really severe mental illness that is not allowing you to actually
Do your science.
carry off your diabolical plans and create your inventions and stuff. So it's kind of interesting on that level. No one would be suffering from severe autism and still capable of being a mad scientist, as far as we've seen.
Not right, but some symptoms I think that are something along the spectrum would be feasible. And
Like
again,
Asperger's?
Well, yeah, that's what I mean by autism
Yeah.
spectrum. But again,
Of course.
it's a situation where you have a very rare combination of traits in different dimensions. So it's a very rare mad scientist who has that perfect combination that has a little bit of that sort of disorder in it. So.
Yep.
Yes.
So if, hypothetically, you had a mad scientist spend all his time with thousands and thousands of computers, what kind of psychoses
Hypothetically.
might they develop?
Oh, well, I mean,
Now wait, are they artificially intelligent computers? Are they like all ladies, lady
Eventually.
computers? Are they?
well, I think that before computers had more of the social component to them that they had now, I think the answer might have been a little bit different. But a lot of our social interaction time now is mediated through the computer. So I don't know. What are you doing here at Google? How many are you talking to each other on your computers, or are you just kind of programming?
Because I'm pretty sure people are spying on us right now through their computers.
Right.
So how do we know those people we meet online are real and not artificial intelligence?
That you have to ask him that question.
I don't know. I have a friend named Turing. You should call him. That's how.
No, I do think that spending a lot of time alone is not good for anyone's mental health. Partly because when we're left to our own devices, our strange behaviors are allowed to continue. And if we have, everyone has strange behaviors, and the more time you spend all by yourself, the more likely you are to engage in those strange behaviors, because you don't get any feedback from the rest of the world telling you that that's a little odd.
Yeah, like Dr. Moreau. So he's like hanging out on this island by himself, creating mutants, and then the mutants all worship him. So he thinks he's doing great. Of course, they don't really know that they're hideous monsters. It's a great example that I'd share.
That's a great example. They're not making mutants here.
You don't know what's going on here. Okay, so.
Anyone else?
Well, I did have one question.
Yes,
All right.
Cliff?
You know, one of the popular memes on the internet is the evil overlord list, which is a list of things when somebody takes over the world in a bad way that they resolve not to do. So no, monologuing, no capes,
That's right.
things like that. I was wondering if you found trends in your book or sort of ideas or things that budding mad scientists should watch out for, like some fatal flaws that undo a lot of the characters in your book.
I think to be a good mad scientist and to survive for a long period of time and succeed as a mad scientist, there's a fine line to walk between seeking revenge and sort of going after whoever your target is, but also not getting so involved in that that's the only thing that you do. Like,
Yeah.
Lex Luthor actually had an entire room dedicated to the planning and extermination of Superman, and that's all he ever did with his time. So I
Well,
think that actually
yeah.
held him back in some ways.
We had we have a section called Not Mad, Just Angry, and it's filled with real scientists, because I think what happens is they're really good in one domain, and then as soon as they get out of this scientific domain, they just get torn up in the business world. So, Tesla trying to actually naive enough to like contact the government of Great Britain and try to sell them, a $30 million attack ray machine. Or Farnsworth getting totally screwed out of making money off the TV, off inventing the television when RCA steals his patents. Similar things happen to Oliver Heaviside, a mathematician who
He solves all these problems and then never quite properly proved all of them. Later, after his death, things have been proved.
he was
and
never good even with interacting with other
scientists.
Yeah, and then you've got someone like Trofim Lysenko, who's not really that smart, but is really good at manipulating other people and he's friends with Stalin, and so
Helpful.
that's really helpful whenever if someone's got an opposing theory, you just get them sent to a gulag. That's one way to do science, I guess. A very mad way. So
Staying well-rounded, I
my
think
advice
that's
is
the
hire a
message.
lawyer. Yeah, you know what I'm saying? Just sort of delegate some of those tasks and stick to the
Yeah,
mad
or an
science.
MBA or something. Yeah. So.
Excellent. Do we have any remaining questions? Oh, we got one way at the top. Actually, if you could use the mic, then
So do you advocate the use of the self-destruct button or not?
It's on robots or just in general?
On your secret lair.
Oh, in a secret layer. When I really think about it, I guess, yeah, as long as you are going to be able to get out of there. Because clearly, if it's your secret lair, you're the smartest person on the planet, and you don't want anyone else to get their filthy mitts on your inventions. So,
But you have the plans for them in your head still.
yeah, and since the lives of your
somewhere.
workers and colleagues are worthless, I think it's fine to have a self-destruct button as long as you've got a way to get out. Because as a mad scientist, you're holding a real treasure trove of information and just likability and good looks, things like that.
Dislikability.
Nobody dislikes a mad scientist. So you've got all this going for you. You need to protect it, but you can't let anyone get a hold of anything else. So I am going to go out and say that I advocate a self-destruct button as long as you can escape. I may have fallen into a little trap.
we have a follow-up.
And one more, so when you capture the good guy in your evil lair, should you explain the whole plan to him or just shoot him?
Well,
We love Dr. No. Okay, so Dr. Julius No captures James Bond and then treats him to a nice dinner.
yeah, he's actually very hospitable.
The
I think it's
question-
worth being hospitable to prisoners because they could have something that you could use. So.
Adulation. The question is, how much adulation can you wring out of them? And also, how much pain can you inflict on them? And the thing is, if they're playing it tough, just shoot them immediately. Yeah, get
But
rid
if
of
you
them.
need their admiration, then try to get some praise out
Yeah.
of them, I think.
I mean,
Tell them your whole plan. Your plan is genius.
if you can't resurrect your father or something to get some kind of positive reinforcement from him, then find your biggest adversary and explain to them how smart you are. I think that that's a key component of being a mad scientist. And once they understand what kind of a genius they're dealing with, then that's when you kill them. Yeah. Oh, I think.
No, that's okay.
Thanks.
Thank
Thank you very much.